We are here with Jaume Duc, who is the current spokesperson for the European Parliament. You've been spokesperson for 6 years now, and before that you were media director for over a decade. Is that correct?
Well, it's the other way around.
The other way around, yeah. Okay.
I'm Director General since 6 years, but I'm the spokesperson of this House since 2006.
Fantastic.
So quite some time, yeah.
So being Director General for Communication and spokesperson in the European Parliament, can you tell us a bit about what your job entails?
Well, in fact, these are two jobs in some way, but of course they are complementary. As a Director General, I'm coordinating the communication services of the Parliament, which, by the way, are quite, let's say, consistent, because we are in charge not just of relationship with the media, radio, televisions, and so on. We are also running our own studios here, the Visitor Center, the House of European History, our campaigns directorate, our offices in all the member states, units in charge of monitoring public opinion. It's quite a huge department in the European Parliament. And my function as a spokesperson, in fact, is to represent the institution publicly on those issues which are not, let's say, politics, which should be and are in the hands of the politicians, the members of the Parliament, and not the administration.
So it really covers a very wide range, everything that communicates or interacts with the citizens of Europe. So you're really the perfect person to ask my next question, which is, what is the role of the European Parliament in the whole EU?
Well, first of all, the EU is a democratic organization. And within the EU, maybe the institution which in some way represents this democracy at full is the European Parliament, because of course the European Parliament is the only one which is elected directly by the citizens. Last time by 200 million Europeans who voted for their candidates to the European Parliament during the 2-3 same days in 27 member states. The European Parliament, of course, it's for the European Union more or less the same as a national parliament is for any member state, and you couldn't imagine a member state being a democracy without a parliament, without a national parliament. So it's the same at the European level. This is the place where the citizens are represented. This is the place which is in some way defending the collective rights and the collective needs of all the European citizens.
And of course, in the European Parliament, similar to national parliaments, we have parties, political parties. In the European Parliament, we have political groups. So can you explain a bit how they are constructed and what the role of political groups are within the European Parliament?
Yeah, there are the European political parties and the political groups. The European political parties, let's say, they are federations of national parties which share the same ideology or the same principles or the same priorities. The political groups are the bodies which reunite the members who come from the same European political family or who join the political group because they share the same way of looking to the future, looking to the pieces of legislation that will be adopted by the European Parliament. So yeah, this is a parliament again, and you can compare this with a national parliament where there are groups depending on the different ideologies. Depending on the result of the elections, these groups will go up or down, or maybe it will disappear. This happened in the past. And they are representing the plurality of the public opinion, the plurality of the European society.
Very good. So, speaking of within the Parliament, you make a lot of legislative decisions that affect everyone in Europe, all the European citizens. So, is there any decisions that have been made recently, or any legislation that directly affects young people specifically?
Yeah, I would say many things. First of all, young people are also European citizens, which means that 100% of the legislation which is adopted by the European Parliament and by the Council will affect you young people. But if you want more, let's say, more concrete examples about what the Parliament is doing with those topics that maybe are closer to young people, this could be, for example, our budgetary decisions to increase the budget of the Erasmus scheme for the next years. This has been a constant battle against other institutions to try to put more money in this scheme because it's working very well. Of course, everything linked to climate change. We have seen in all surveys since many years that this is the first priority for youth in Europe. Sometimes not exactly in the same way country by country, but all in all, this is the first priority for young people. But it's also about, for example, the decision by the European Parliament to ask other institutions, to ask governments and to ask private companies to avoid, for example, unpaid traineeships. This is something that I think, of course, comes with or will come with a concrete effect on young people. And then, of course, everything which is linked to education, which is linked to culture, which is linked to the social rights, to gender equality, to protection of minorities. I think that all these things are really close to the heart of young people.
And you mentioned the unpaid internships or the framework for quality traineeships that the European Parliament passed legislation on just 2 weeks ago or recently. I know the European Youth Forum, as a representative body for young people, campaigned very hard for this to be adopted over the last couple of years even. So what is the next stage for this report and how might it then come to affect young people?
The next stage should be that the European Commission comes with a draft legislation, a draft piece of legislation, which would become mandatory for all the member states.
So can you explain a bit about how that process works, how the report was formed in the committee and then through the Parliament, and why does it go back to the Commission?
Yeah, there are two ways here. I mean, depending whether we are in front of a draft piece of legislation or we are just in the previous discussion within the European Parliament. In this second case, of course, this Parliament is quite open to society, and the members are in contact with thousands of organizations and sectors of society, including, for example, the Youth Forum. So when we see that there is a need for new legislation, we don't have the right of initiative as the national parliaments, but we have the possibility of prepare a report where we ask the European Commission, or in some way we push the European Commission to come back with a draft piece for creating this legislation. And this is not mandatory, this is not compulsory for the Commission from a legal point of view, but politically we know that if the Commission wanted to keep good relationship with the European Parliament and not enter into, let's say, troubled waters, better for them to follow the indications done by the European Parliament. Once this draft piece of legislation will be presented by the Commission, it will be discussed by the competent committee. In this case, this could be maybe the Economic and Monetary Committee or the Legal Affairs Committee, depending, how this legislation is presented. This takes a couple of months where there are discussions, where the members have the possibility to introduce amendments. And once there is an official position taken by the Parliament, then we have to discuss again this proposal with the Council of Ministers, with the representatives of the member states. And once there is an agreement, you can consider that the law has been adopted.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of people do maybe comment on how legislation within the European Parliament or within the whole EU is quite a slow process, and it does take a couple of months or years really to take effect from the ideas, from the reports to...
Some pieces of legislation take quite a lot of time, but I think that this is good because this means that the quality of this legislation will be quite high. Don't forget that this Parliament is legislating for, again, 440 million citizens in 27 member states. Not all the member states look to this kind of legislation in the same way. Not all the societies have exactly the same necessities or the same priorities. So you have to be sure that you are really legislating, taking into account many different contexts. Mm-hmm. And then in many topics, more and more, when the European Parliament or when the European Union is legislating, we are also in some way setting the scene for the rest of the world. This is something which happened, for example, with the Data Protection Act. This is something that will probably happen in the next weeks or months with the first world legislation on artificial intelligence. So you need some time to do this properly, to do this well. But when there is an urgency, then we can we can pass a law in a couple of weeks or even in a couple of days. And this is what we did, for example, during one of the last plenary sessions on the legislation which will allow the Commission and the Member States to send more ammunition to the Ukrainian government because of the war.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. And coming back to this this piece on the unpaid internships, I know it wasn't only the European Youth Forum lobbying for it, but it was also recommended in the Conference of the Future of Europe report, yes. Which happened last year, last year and the year before. So how is the Parliament acting on the other recommendations that came up in the Conference of the Future of Europe?
It's a kind of Bible for us. Mm-hmm. You know that the European Parliament was pushing really hard for having this conference and also for introducing in this conference for the first time the possibility for normal citizens to be part of the discussion and to take also part of the responsibility on the decisions, the recommendations that the conference adopted at the end of the 1 year time of, working time. Now what we are doing is that we are assessing how the European Commission is transforming in legislation those recommendations that don't need to reform the treaties, that can be done with the current European treaty, what we call the Treaty of Lisbon. But we know also that some of these recommendations go much far than the treaty, and that we will need at some point to enter into a process for reforming this treaty. Mm-hmm. And this is also a priority for this House, and by the way, this will be probably one of the decisions taken by the Parliament right after summer break. I'm sure that in the next plenary session in September, there will be a vote where the European Parliament is going to officially ask the other institutions to put into place, to open this process for reforming the treaty, because this will be the only way to respect the mandate received from the Conference on the Future of Europe.
Mm-hmm. So the Conference on the Future of Europe really was one of the biggest exercises in participatory democracy, and we did see it really engaged a lot of young people as well through it. In what other ways is the European Parliament engaging young people in the political decision-making process?
Doing many things concerning youth participation. First of all, you know, because you help us, or your organization is helping us, every 2 years we organize this European Youth event in Strasbourg, where more or less 10,000 young people have the possibility to discuss on the future of Europe on different topics and to be in contact with the members of the European Parliament, and then after the eye to come with official recommendations for the institution and for several of its committees. Second, we organize many activities, many events focusing on young people through our offices in the member states, because this is also quite important for us. As you probably know also, we again put into place a specific platform, which this time is called Together.eu, to help young people to engage with European politics, or at least with the European activity. And then you can engage in politics in many other ways, but at least from this institutional point of view, having the possibility to be in contact with the European Parliament, having the possibility in some way to cooperate with the European Parliament in explaining to other people, to other young people in Europe, why the European Union is important, why it's also important to protect democracy at the European level. And and then there are many other activities where we try to connect youth organizations with the members of the European Parliament, because we think that this is probably the most efficient way of offering to the members the youth vision for each one of the topics or the files that are on the members' desks.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Yeah, there's really a lot of ways to engage young people in the decision-making process. And one of the ways as well that we're seeing become more adopted is lowering the voting age to 16. We've seen most recently with Belgium and Germany choosing to lower the voting age for European elections. How do you think this might impact the other member states of the EU?
I hope that there will be an impact. In fact, in these last months, there were 2 more countries which lowered the age. Belgium and Germany. The European Parliament adopted also a resolution a couple of months ago proposing to modify the European legislation, among other things, to lower the age to 16 for the whole European Union, not just 5 member states, but all of them, because for the Parliament it's obvious that our obligations should come also with rights. When you are 16 years old, you start really having obligations, depending if you are studying or you start to work, but there are obligations, social obligations. And at the same time, this is the age where you start in some way being interested by, not just by politics, but also by what happens around you. So this is probably the perfect moment to initiate you to something which is essential, which is practicing democracy. And one way of practicing democracy, of course, is voting, or maybe I would say the most important way of practicing democracy is voting. But then, of course, this comes also with some extra responsibility for both the European and the national institutions. I was in a meeting with young Belgian people, in fact teenagers, 15, 16 years old, in a school in Molenbeek a couple of months ago, discussing with them the fact that now they will have this possibility of voting, but they need to register. If they don't register, then they cannot vote. And they told me, yeah, thank you very much. We are really happy that we got this right to vote, but we need information. You cannot put us in front of a ballot box and think that we will, let's say, know already everything we need for casting a responsible vote. So we need information about the political parties, we need information about how the European Parliament works, we need information about the different ideologies, the different priorities. We need really to be prepared for voting in a responsible way, which was, I would say, a perfect and very sensible answer.
Yeah. And what is the European Parliament doing in providing this information, or where could you find maybe information on the European political groupings or parties and their priorities?
We are starting right now with our communication campaign for the next European elections. They will take place in less than 1 year, June 2024. We received already a couple of months ago the political mandate from our institution, from our authorities to run this campaign. This is something that we did in the past with quite a success in 2019, and that will be focusing quite strongly also on young people. Participation in the European elections has been improving or improved during the last European elections, but there is still a difference between the general average of voting, the turnout, and the youth turnout. Last time 51% of the European citizens voted, but only 42% of people from 16 or 18 to 25 years old voted. So we still need to make a special effort to be sure that the number of, the percentage of young people who vote is at least the same that for other age categories. Because if there is an election which in some way is setting the future of young generations, these are the European elections.
Yeah. So you did mention that the next European elections are in June 2024. Can you explain what the impact of the European elections have on the whole functioning of the EU? What changes with the European elections?
It has a huge impact. First of all, because this is a legislative body. So depending on the majorities here, legislation will be adopted in a way or in another. Again, in the same way as in the national parliaments, depending on who gets the majority and depending on how people will vote and who will be the members that will be elected. Maybe the positions adopted by this House on climate change, on migration, on security, on social policies, on economy, on the EU budget will be different. So, of course, each vote in some way will count before knowing how this House is going to react and to work. And it's not just about the European Parliament, because then, of course, you know that the Parliament is in charge of electing the President of the Commission, and then also electing or, let's say, validating the choices for the members of the European Commission, the commissioners coming from the 27 member states. And this, of course, again, will depend on the results of the elections and will depend on which kind of majorities will be in this House. And then, of course, there will be 5 years where the Commission, the Council and the European Parliament will be obliged to cooperate, but this cooperation will be easier or more difficult depending on the results of the elections.
Yeah, so could you elaborate on the election process itself and what role the European Parliament has in ensuring trust and integrity for the process?
Well, this is a responsibility to be shared with the governments, with authorities at the national level. Because you know that politically these are European elections. People are electing the members for one single European Parliament, but technically, even I would say legally, these are 27 national elections. Each country is organizing the election in different ways. Of course, the main elements are the same country by country, but then there are the specificities, even including the fact that there are countries that will vote on Thursday or Friday or Saturday, even if the big majority of member states are going to vote on Sunday, the 9th of June. So they will be in charge of protecting the integrity of these elections at the national level. We will be in charge of the night of the elections to be those who will inform the public opinion, the media and the public opinion about the results country by country, and also about how these results will be transformed in seats and what this will mean in terms of majorities, minorities, etc. And of course, before the European elections, during the whole elections campaign, both the European institutions, including the Parliament and the national institutions, will be also in charge of fighting against any kind of disinformation campaigns. And we know, because of past experiences, that when elections approach, being at the European level, being at national level, there will be campaigns telling to people that elections don't matter, that you don't need to vote because your vote is completely useless, or after the elections they will tell you that the results were corrupted and were manipulated. All these things are there since a couple of years. They will probably come back when these elections will approach. Yeah, we will share this responsibility in fighting against these kind of campaigns which are harming democracy.
Mm-hmm. So actually, leading on from this question on what you mentioned, disinformation, what advice would you give to young people who might never have voted in elections before, or this could be their first election, or who are considering not voting in the next elections? What would your advice be to
Well, I would say, first of all, that these are the most important elections for young people. When you vote for the national elections, you are deciding on the politics for the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years. When you are voting for the European elections or during the European elections, in fact, you are contributing to shape an idea of Europe for the next 10, 15, 20 years. Because what is important is to know whether the next parliament will be in favor of accelerating the European integration, or maybe slowing the European integration. And this has an impact not just for the 3, 4, 5 next years, this has an impact for the next 10 or 15 or 20, which means that in fact the effect will be bigger in the younger generations than in the older ones for obvious reasons. And then the second message is that if you don't vote, in some way, you are delegating to vote to someone else. You don't vote, someone else will vote on your behalf.
Well, thank you very much, Joe Duke, for giving so much of your time to us and for answering all our questions very, very well. So,
thanks for the interview, and I would say more than that, thanks for your work. And I would like really to encourage young people to not just to participate during the next European elections, but also to be quite active in politics. We need young politicians. We need the next generations of young politicians being prepared and sharing responsibility with other generations. And I think that this is our role also to play by your organization. So thanks again.